Hey, welcome back to Sharing Sawdust. My name's Alex. This is the 6th episode in the game design series, all about where I'm bringing an idea in my head out into the real world for my friends and family to play. Now, see you later. This episode is going to be a little bit shorter than the previous 3 because we're talking about branding in this episode as opposed to playtesting. So there's a little bit less to dive into. But with branding, we'll talk about what title I have come up with to name the game, the imagery that I'm going to be using to convey the game and elements of the game that are going to be more stylized, and then also the elevator pitch, something that I'll be practicing to help share with people who have never played the game before, either at game conferences or just friends who have never been a part of the playtesting. So without further ado, let's get into it and say goodbye to Falafel. She's not leaving. She's just not here. Okay, so let's talk about branding and theming and why it matters. I was recently listening to a Planet Money podcast all about how they are trying to build their own board game and bring it to life. And it may seem like they're trying to compete with me, but let's remember who started first and whose game is obviously going to be way cooler. But no, they actually had a lot of really good nuggets of information, and they're actually working with the creators of Exploding Kittens, which is a really successful board game company. And one of the creators had this really interesting bit on why games are successful, and it's because of 2 reasons. One, they have a very recognizable theme that draws a large audience in. So think of like nature-themed board games. You have things like Wingspan, Everdell, Harmonies, just to name a few that I really love. But each of them are defined by a unique mechanic. So you can go about either approaching it from first defining what your theme is and then finding what that unique mechanic is that separates it from the group, or go about it the opposite way of you have found this really cool mechanic either through another game that you were testing and it kind of spiraled off, but then you need to find how it ties into the theme and how to give it a good story where people can read about it and say, I want to play that game. So with this design, we had the mechanic, we had the satisfaction of magnets snapping together, either being abducted or colliding with each other. But the idea of what exactly that gameplay was telling as a story didn't really fully flesh itself out until episode 4 or 5. The idea of a UFO being part of the gameplay was in my original ideations, but I wasn't really sure if it would actually work for me. Now, at this point, we spent a lot of time perfecting the mechanic, and this episode is all about perfecting the storytelling and the theming, because you should put equal amount of time and effort into that as you're putting into other parts of your game. So without further ado, let's dive a little bit deeper into how I did that. Okay. So going off the idea of this theme needs to be something that is familiar to a lot of folks is a bit of a double-edged sword, because the more popular your idea is in pop culture and familiarity, you run into the issue of other people exploring that same idea and trying to find unique ways to approach it and title it for their own IP. And for me, I ran into a couple of roadblocks right away, and I really thought I was cooking with gas until you go online, type in the idea that you're looking for, and realize that it's already been taken, even very recently. One example I came up with was MooFO, a fun little play on UFO and how we've been calling one side of the pucks moo. It turns out there is an online version of cows flying spaceships titled exactly that. So I was SOL in regards to that name. One other thing I wanted to really try to run with was the title of Abduction, because that is something that describes the game and it's really easy to understand that that's also the mechanic. But the problem is Abduction didn't really have a nice way to fit into what I was trying to call it, so I tried adjusting it to call it Abpuction. But then while doing research to abduction-related games, I ran into the already existing board game called abduction. Now I'm saying that, but the way it's spelled is D-U-C-K rather than just D-U-C. It's a subtle play where ducks are getting abducted by aliens in a very fun board game that I may have to get my hands on myself. Now, looking at those two options, and it's easy to say, wow, I had a really good idea or two really good ideas that I thought were creative, but just really butt up against things that already exist in the market. It's easy to get fazed by that. And that's a pun for later. But I made sure I did not turn to AI at any point. This is something that I want to pride myself on throughout this game design process, where it's just me and my organic creativity. None of this will be using computer generated or AI generated ideas, so I wanted to keep it real. So taking some time to really think about different ideas that I had, I came up with the genius title that I really like, called Phasers versus Grazers, because the idea here is I wanted to give something that described there are aliens versus cows, and there's obviously, some sort of alien spaceship involved, but I wanted to do it in a unique way that also still had a catch to it. It's very easy to remember. And stumbling upon the idea of saying, well, cows are called grazers, phasers are related to space and thus aliens. Could we pair those two together and come up with something really fun? And I think I've really hit that off. Now, that's something I will get feedback on continuously through game testing, but right now I'm really happy with where that is at. So let's move on to the instructions and also how to pitch a game successfully. Okay, so how to pitch correctly and successfully is simply nailing what you need to say and not really dancing around the details. When it comes to capturing people's attention, you have to be quick. We don't really have much of an attention span these days. So the basics when it comes to game design is how many friends can I play it with? Who should I be playing this with? Can I play it with my family? Does a 5-year-old know how to use these mechanics correctly? And then also, how long does it take? If it's a game of Catan, it might take an hour, but if it's a game of Go Fish, you might be done in 10 minutes. So that is why you see so many popular board games with the label of age, time limit, and number of players on the front of the box. It's something that you can easily pick up, but should also be included in a pitch when telling friends, family, or even possible game buyers that want to sell your game. A crucial part of the pitch is to tell a story that relates to the game while also weaving in those important details of playtime, strategy, and maybe not scoring, but how a general idea of what a turn looks like. And I'll show you an example of what I came up with now. Phasers vs. Grazers is a 20-minute, 2 to 8 player dexterity game centered around alien abduction. You are leading an expedition in the vast farmlands of the Midwest, attempting to study the most important life form there, the cow. Now, the problem is the mothership can only take the cow up into the central probing bay. It is far too large to go into the 3 outer return bays. So for each of your turns, you must make the important decision to either attempt to get a cow back to the ship and risk losing it in the process, or perhaps send one of your team members back to the outer bays for backup. Now, it's important to keep in mind that your team is competing against another team out in the field. And depending on how you perform, only one will be rewarded with the ultimate prize, a pizza party hosted by the Queen herself. Like that pitch I just gave, it's a great way to establish a foundation of how your instructions are voiced. This gives you an idea of what the theme is, the language you're using, and how you describe the game itself. The instructions should follow a similar tone, and by having that pitch there for reference, you're able to stick to your script quite easily. Now, what the instructions should look like is another version of iterating and testing, and that's something that you want to do with unguided or blind play testing, as I call it. This is something that we'll be talking about in the next episode, so I don't have any information on that yet, but stick around, and I'm sure we'll talk about that next week. So, Thank you, and we'll see you later.